Okay, so I'm going to get going. Hi, my name is Ernest Co. This is Corn Walker, my partner in crime. For those of you who know us, we are still the guys at Proof. For those of you who don't know us, we are still the guys at Proof. It's been a while since we've been here, and we're glad to be back. We've been busy, but we're trying to make an effort to talk to more people and come back and do more of these things so we can share what we're doing with everybody. How many of you went to pause this year or last year? Okay, so some of this may be a little bit of a repeat. Hope to share some new material. The purpose of what we're trying to do here is largely to really have a conversation about what we're doing in our kitchen, so to speak, right? So none of this is baked per se. This is not super polished R&D that we're kind of rolling out. We're just sharing some ideas, sharing some R&D stuff, and hoping to elicit some ideas and some conversation, and to give you sort of a sneak peek into the kinds of stuff that we're working on and what we're doing. Right? So for those of you who don't know us, we do a lot of work in the education and government and nonprofit and small to mid-sized enterprise space. And I'd like to start up by sort of defining what that means to us. Right? So a lot of people throw this word around, enterprise. It sounds like it's a really big, scary thing. And for us, it has sort of a very coherent set of features that are relevant to the kinds of things that we do in FileMaker. Right? So for us, what that means is these applications are pretty data intensive. You know, they deal with the business at large, and they also deal with workflow and a lot of dependencies between offices and different domains and whatnot. And you really have sort of an ecosystem of either apps or technologies or requirements that can all play together to drive a whole business through from soup to nuts. Right? So, and by enterprise, I don't necessarily mean very, very large organizations. Right? What we're really concerned about is that there's an organization that does a lot of things to drive their business, and the suite of tools and technology and software and applications you use to make that cover the gamut from simple stuff like invoicing to more complex stuff like supply chain management and so forth. Right? So in our parlance, we think of schools as an enterprise because they don't just teach people, right? They don't just offer classes and whatnot. There's a whole business wrapped up in that process. So it's not records, managing people, managing constituents, managing money, managing fundraising, you name it, missions, the whole gamut becomes part and parcel of the quote-unquote enterprise. So for us, when we talk about enterprise, what we're really saying is that we're in the business of helping customers do end-to-end sort of data management. Right? It's not a value judgment. It's not better or worse. It's just that this happens to be what we do. It happens to be how we have been kind of toiling in this business for quite a bit. Right?
Oh no, missing column.
Yeah, don't critique my JSON. I gave up after the fourth slide. You see, and I didn't pass it to JSON Lin, so unless there are bugs. But so the thing that's important for us in sort of contextualizing what we're trying to say here is that we really also think about FileMaker as having kind of two roles in the enterprise. One is sort of FileMaker at the center, and FileMaker as kind of the glue. Right? Does that kind of make sense to people? So starting with kind of the glue concept, FileMaker is really good at this, right? You can come in and you can fit in the niche of something. You've got two systems that don't connect, and somebody says, God, I really need this app, and FileMaker to the rescue. That's kind of FileMaker as a glue, right? It can be FileMaker as a really quick reporting engine or a really quick application that kind of consolidates a bunch of data together and spits out something, or FileMaker does one specific thing that nothing else can do because everything's too expensive or too brittle or too whatever. Right? FileMaker is excellent for that. At the enterprise level, however, we also use FileMaker at the center, and that's a little bit more complicated. So by that, for those of you who work in schools or larger organizations, that usually means that that's the source of truth for the organization. It could be people data, it could be contact data, it could be addresses, phone numbers, all the way down to money stuff, invoices, whatnot. But the idea is that you have the center, this epicenter of your information system, your ecosystem, and things tap into it either in a very tightly coupled way or a very loosely coupled way, but they kind of depend on the center for other downstream processes, right? So we kind of play on both ends of the spectrum, and it can be a little bit kind of schizophrenic, but I want to kind of use this as a framing device because it really impacts the way you think about kind of the strategies you use in FileMaker development. Right, so we're trying to be conscious of that. So I kind of talk about this. One of the features about using FileMaker in the center is that we have the responsibility of thinking about data models in a more generalized way, right? So if you're, say, solving a problem for a specific department, you can just focus on exactly the kinds of things you want. The tables can be pretty flat. You can be, let's say in the school environment, you're building an app for teachers, and your fields would be like teacher name, teacher homeroom, or whatever it is. But in a more generalized data model, that's not necessarily available to you. Right? You have sort of an abstraction where you're not just serving a teacher, you're serving parents, you're serving students, you're serving people that are part of the entire constituency of the school. Right? So for us, when we say FileMaker Center, we have to kind of worry about more complex data models, right? And so this brings me back to sort of one of the, I think the themes of this conversation, which is, we've been doing party model at Proof for over 10 years, since 2006. Before, right at the cusp of the 7 days, when we started getting into this is how we have really built basically our business around, our practice in FileMaker. So I'm talking about sort of generalized data models and FileMaker the center, because what the party model tries to do is essentially giving us a way of kind of generalizing a solution for multiple organizations and customers on a core data model that doesn't change that much. Right? I'll come back to this a little bit. Does that make sense so far? Yeah. So FileMaker as a glue, on the other hand, is, yes?
Can you describe the party model?
Yes, I'm going to, actually. You give me 2 slides, I'll get right to it. 5 slides, maybe. Right. FileMaker as glue is probably the easier of the two. And, I mean, not easy in terms of it's effortless, but easy in terms of what FileMaker is very naturally capable of doing. Right? It's something you can slide in, and you can make things pretty flat, and you can really focus on building great UI and just solving the problem. It's fast, you do finds and whatnot. So we did a lot of that too. But again, I want to make a distinction between the two. Right? Real quick before I dive into the party model, right? So again, just more context. Apparently, I have 2 hours, so I don't know why I'm rushing through this, but let's do this. At Proof, we sort of prioritize configuration over customization, and that is sort of, I don't want to overgeneralize, but in some ways that may seem like an inversion of the natural pattern in FileMaker, right? Maybe not. How many of you are sort of product developers here in FileMaker? Right? How many of you build custom solutions day in, day out? Right?
How many don't use FileMaker?
And this is not to say that we value one versus the other as sort of a practice. This is to say that our business model is built around sort of a licensing model, right? When we have an engagement, it's often a combination of, hey, this is a license for a software system that does a bunch of things, 80%, 90%, whatever the number is of what the institution needs. And then there's a pile of stuff that it doesn't deal with out of the box that we kind of customize on. So we tend to configure 70 to 80% and then maybe customize beyond that. Now, that's not what everybody does, granted. Right? A lot of people in the FileMaker universe may begin with the customization aspect. Everything is kind of bespoke but from scratch. Again, that's an awesome place to be if that's what you do. That's just not what we do, because we work in enterprise space and we're competing with other products and solutions, and our licensing is a big component of what we do. So when I say product, what we're really doing is basically building software as that's implementable by an implementation team. And that's actually how we're organized in the back. At Proof, And there's the developers, and then there's the service layer on top of that, where they take our product and they go to a school, go to a nonprofit, and say, hey, we're going to configure this for you, and we're going to customize on top of that. Our job as developers at Proof is to make the product so that it's configurable and it's implementable, right? So we're not always the first. There's always a layer between us and the customer. Now, in reality, it's a little bit more fuzzy, but in theory, that's kind of what we like to say, right? So we like to think of ourselves as products first, as sort of the way we kind of prioritize our R&D efforts. So a lot of what we do is kind of try to figure out how do we productize X. Again, it's not to say we don't do custom stuff. We do a lot of custom stuff, but our inclination and mindset is always to take the custom stuff and eventually turn it into a product, and then add it to sort of the pile of assets that we have that becomes part of the licensing model, right? And I say all of this because in order to understand where we've prioritized our efforts and architecture and the party model, it helps to kind of understand the underlying logic or the business drivers behind all that stuff. Make sense so far? Hey, John. How are you? It's good to see you. So I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to switch back and forth between Corn and myself because he's got non-slide stuff and I've got slide stuff. So I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll see what happens. One of the themes at Proof from an architecture standpoint is that we put a premium on modularity, again, and also generalization. And what does that look like, right? So I like to kind of show you the party model and give you a sense of what that looks like. I don't know whether I have the files here. Corn, do you have the files? Okay, switch to you. I think the way we do this is this, make presenter, is that right? So what we're about to show you here is our school ERP system, and it consists. Why don't you look at the folder maybe? So just
folder, right?
Yeah.
That's scary.
Now this may be a little bit scary, but can you guys see this? I don't know. Maybe.
Command Shift Plus.
Does that work in Finder?
Command Option Plus. Yeah.
Just Command Plus.
If it's set up.
Yeah. Go into Preferences. Go into Accessibility.
Well, I'm going to vamp a little bit while he's doing this.
I never use this computer. I just got it back from Apple because I hated the keyboard on it. But they put a new keyboard on it. It's great now. So.
Accessibility.
So when we deploy a system, the full Proof ERP covers admissions, advancement, fundraising, academics, transcripts, and 6 or 7 other smaller components. But it's a pretty large breadth in terms of coverage, right? So we're solving people that do intake. We're solving the problems around class registration and enrollment. We're solving problems around fundraising, the whole gamut. So the Proof system is actually pretty large, although at any given institution, you may deploy some, if not all, of those components. So if you look at our project structure, is that better? I guess I'm the boss here. If you look at our project structure,
Oh, you could have zoomed.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I could have zoomed. So this is our dev trunk here. You can see that we've organized our folders into sort of the modules like academics, activities, admissions, advancement, collector, core CRM, and a whole bunch of other miscellaneous stuff. But when we say Proof ERP system, that's what we mean. So every single one of these folders contain what we call modules. And modules are a collection of files, the interface, the database, the API files that kind of represent the totality of that module. Make sense so far? Right. So I haven't touched the party model yet. But where the party model comes in is in this core CRM folder that I'm talking about. And although there are a lot of files here, the 3 files I want to point your attention to are the core CRM file, the core DB file, and the core API file. And we'll talk a little bit about why we do it that way, but that's a pretty common pattern. Okay. So what the party model, how many of you know what the party model is? Okay.
Nobody knows.
No?
How many know what a database is? Okay. Just trying to get the baseline here. So
Is there another name for the party model?
there is not another name for the party model. It was because it's not ours. What we've done is we've implemented a database model called the party model. There's a guy named Lynn Silverstone. He wrote 3 thick books. They're about 2 inches thick, each of them, called Data Model Patterns, volumes 1, 2, and 3. And what they do is they present generalized data models. So the idea is, I've got a problem, and here's a data model that solves it. And one of the volumes has some very specific data models for different industries. So if you're in banking, it has a data model for banking. If you're in education, sadly, it didn't have one of those. So we had to come up with our own. But any industry, he has some data models specific to that industry. And then in one of the volumes, he actually looks at general data model patterns. So how do we abstract all of these industries and figure out what's common between them and how to model it so that I've got a data model that's going to work in a school, it's going to work in a business, it's going to work in a bank, it's going to work anywhere. And so that's where he came up with one of the parts of this, which is the party model. And so the party model is meant to solve a specific problem. And the way that he puts it is, he talks about in a business that has contracts. He says, typically, if you have a contract, you have 2 people that are part of that contract who are going to sign that contract. But they're not always people. Sometimes the contract is between you and another person, such as my wedding contract. Sometimes the contract is between you and an organization. And so he said, so what some people do is they sort of have this fork in their model. They say, I've got a contract and one person signing here, and the other person, maybe it's a person and maybe it's an organization, and it kind of splits between the two. And if you wanted to see like what the address is of the other person signing the contract, well, maybe you have to go to the organization table and get that address, or go to the person table and get that address. So he says, if we look at this and generalize it and think of it as a party, so the contract is actually between 2 parties, and it actually sounds like that's the language we use. Say a contract is between 2 parties, and you put that into a database model. So now, instead of a party being this specific thing, a person, or this specific thing, an organization, a party is an abstract concept. And a party has a name, and that's about it.
So another way to bring us down to earth is think about your own solutions, right? How many of you have a customer table that you've made, and at the same time you have a staff table, or a
vendor
table, or a organizations table, or a company's table? And when you want to link an address to one of those tables, how do you do it? You see what I'm trying to get at? So you may have an address that hangs off person, you may have an address that hangs off context, you may have an address that hangs off vendor, and pretty soon you've got maybe all these kinds of keys everywhere and kind of doing all these kinds of joins, and it's like, that's got to be a better way, right? The better way is to abstract all those different things, those entities, into a generalized thing called a party. That's it. Yeah. That's the fundamental essence of the party model.
And we didn't invent it.
We didn't invent it, so don't blame us. But we did implement it. So Quan's going to try to jump in and kind of show you what that looks like implementation-wise. And we're going to start from the bottom and kind of go all the way up. So we're going to start with the schema, and then we're going to look at the whole stack from scripts and all that. Okay? And since we have 2 hours, we're going to take all of 2 hours. No, I'm kidding. We're going to take some time to look at this.
So quite literally, we have a table here called party. And that sits at the heart of everything. So if I look at the fields in that table, there's not a lot of fields in here. Yeah, I'm moving. Oh, I'm in the wrong file. I have to go to the database file. That was another thing that Ernest alluded to. Our system has all of these different files. So we have a database file, an API file, and the application file. So all of our actual data is defined in this file here. There we go. This is better. So we have this party table, and this party table has just a few fields in here. One of the things I love about 17, by the way, is the whole default fields thing. Is anybody using that yet? I love that because I can't tell you how many times I go into all these tables. I'm like, why did I name that? You know, I have like all of these fields that are standard, except they're not standard. So I love that feature. I didn't think I would love it. You know, when I first saw it, I was like, who cares? And then I realized, you know, actually, I could have used this like 10 years ago when I started this.
Can you customize your fields?
What's that?
Can you customize your fields?
Yeah. I mean, so we start out with, you know, just this base set of fields that we have in every table, an ID field, you know, some things with the creation accounts, etc. But they're all different. Not every table has them, and it drives me nuts when I go to a table and it's like, oh, where are my default fields?
It's close.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you gotta have that.
You don't have to hack the XML. There's a tool out there, actually. I forget the guy's name. He's from Goya. He wrote a little FileMaker database that will let you create your own custom fields, so you can create the names and everything. And then there have been a few people. If you look on the FileMaker community website, there's another guy who documented how to do some other field types like summary fields and calculation fields, because those aren't in the FileMaker file. So you can actually do different types of fields if you want. And I have done that. Like I've customized my default fields XML, so I have like a calculation field and I have a summary field that I use in there. So in essence, my party has essentially just a name. It's got a type, and then not much else. You know, a couple of fields that just help me kind of keep my relationship graph short. Are any of you familiar with the relationship graph path limit? So there's this thing in FileMaker, if your relationship graph is larger than 5 hops away, then it's not cached. So if you do a find on a field that's like more than 5 relationships away, you're actually going to do sort of a non-join cached search on that. So it's going to be a little bit slower, not like terribly slower, but a little bit slower. And so we try to keep everything, you know, within 5 hops. So we end up putting some things in some of the tables to sort of add that. But in terms of the general model, we just have the party.
And I'll also add that just keep a note of that record calendar is like 48,000. This is not our largest set by any means, but I want you to pay attention to the ratio of records to fields. So our tables are really narrow. In fact, it's much narrower today. This started 10 years ago, so we've got stuff in there that we don't even use anymore as FileMaker's advanced, and that's kind of a general theme in a lot of what we do.
Yeah. So off of party, then we have different party types. So one of the party types is person, and we actually create a table for that. So here we have a person table, and you'll notice that we have a party ID, and so that party ID is linking to the party record. And then we have additional things, because not all parties have a last name, not all parties have a marital status, but people do. So anything that's specific to a person and not general to any party goes into the person table. Same thing if I look at the organization. Organization has a party ID that's linking to that party record, but people don't have a charter location, which I am just noticing I misspelled. Anybody see that? Wow. Nobody's noticed that in like 10 years. I know. If I change it, it's going to break our CWP or something. People don't have charter types. People may have tax IDs, but we don't track those for people. We have other types of parties. We have another party called a household, and that also has a party ID. And households for us, because we're dealing with education, schools are always trying to mail to households. They want to know what family am I mailing to. When I send something out to the parents of so-and-so student, they're sending it to a household. And so that household has like mailing codes. I want to know, do I get bills at this household? Do I get grades at this household? Do I get general mailings at this household? So we have all of these different tables that are linked to parties, but are not, you know, so we split all of that data out. And so that's basically what Lynn Silverstein recommends, is that when you have this party, now you could just put all of these fields into one table, and I could prefix them. I could have organization tax ID, organization charter location, person sex, person marital status. So that's one way that you can implement the party model. But then you've just got, 100 fields, maybe 200 fields in your party table, and you have to prefix them all, and that's not really actually the performance on that in terms of FileMaker. FileMaker prefers narrower tables, because when you bring that down, if you have all of these records and they've got 100 columns, FileMaker has to bring all of those columns down when you bring down that a record in that table. Sure. So the party table here doesn't have much in the way of fields that we actually use.
In fact, the only thing that's really, we don't use the global, that's deprecated.
Right.
There's a bunch of stuff in there that we don't. The essential ones are the party ID.
All right, we don't use search text anymore.
We don't use search text anymore. We replace that with Elastic, which I'll show a little bit. Replacing it. We don't reuse. We don't use a bunch of stuff in there. This is, again, 10 years ago, we were the tools, and then incrementally we're taking things out of the core. The most essential stuff in here are the party ID and party name and party type.
Yeah.
So far, so good? So going back to sort of the address problem that I kind of posited earlier. So instead of hanging things off the vendor or the customer, we hang everything off the party. So when I need an address for anything, the party is the one that gets the address or the phone number or whatever it is. And so that's one part of the party model. The second part of the party model, which is actually the more important part, is the idea of building relationships with other entities or things in the system. Right, so again, going back to Corin's earlier proposition of how do you build a contract between two people or a person and an organization. That's all done through what we call a relationship engine using the party model.
Any questions about party, right? Or everybody generally get it, or okay. So the relationship model is part of the party model. So again, in the book, what he talks about is how to build relationships between people. And when we looked at this problem, we found a couple of things that led us to the specific implementation. One of the problems that we have always is reciprocating relationships. So when you have like a single table that joins two people, it's difficult to know from any direction who the related person is. So we looked at different ways, like having multi-valued keys and things like that. And what we decided to do actually is to create two entries into the relationship table. So what we end up having in a relationship is a relationship record that is linked to another relationship record that's then linked to the other person.
And the reason we do this, again, to bring it down to some familiar territory here. So in a traditional non-party model system, let's say if you want to build a relationship between a teacher and the student, what do? You have a teacher table, you have a student table, and then you maybe have a join table in between. You kind of join the two, right? So now I'm going to add another problem to that space, right? What if you want to relate a teacher to a substitute teacher? You add another table, you add another join, you stick the relationship to two. And now you want to relate the parent to the teacher because the parent has a relationship with the teacher. What do? You see where I'm going with this? So, in a very simple edge space where you have a very specific set of relationships between a very specific set of entities and you don't have to abstract that, that's fine. But our problem is that we don't know ahead of time what those relationships are. Like we can go to a school that says, well, we have a special type of counseling program and we need to define school guidance counselors, whatever the special title is, and they need to have a relationship with students in this particular way. So the roles, which we'll talk about in a little bit, are indeterminate in our domain. And this is the whole reason for the party model, right? Because otherwise the alternative is to say, hey, let's make this a design problem. What kind of roles do you have today? And we'll hard code that and build entities and tables and then build those joins.
Right. One of the other problems that we ran into being in education is sometimes the teacher is the student. So you have teaching assistants, you have student teachers, you have, if you're going into a college, you might have a faculty member who's an adjunct faculty, but who's also taking a class at the college. And so that person is serving in two different roles. And in one case, they're serving as a student, in another, they're serving as a teacher. So the way that we handle this, again, in the party model, is just through this abstract concept called a role. And a role kind of takes the place of when we would actually create like a teacher table, and we create a student table, and we create a relationship between the teacher table and the student table. Now we actually are creating relationships between two different roles. So I, as a teacher, have a record and role that says my party ID and my role of teacher. If I'm also a student, I have another record and role that has my party ID and a role of student. So I have two records in there, and depending on what role I'm in at that time, it'll have relationships to other things.
Is this different than selector connector?
Yes.
Well, yeah, selector connector is a graph organization technique. And what this is really about a data model. We actually use like a little selector connector here. I mean, we kind of pick and choose between our graph organization, depending on what best fits the mood. But this is really about how you organize your data. And what this allows us to do is to quickly, when we hear about another role that we've never heard of, we go into a school that has like this special, like we go into a special education school, and they may have an IEP coordinator, and
nobody else has.
That has to be related to a student, and we can say, oh, no problem. That's just another role that we add. So we add a role type of IEP coordinator, and we create a relationship between that person and the student.
So another way to think about this is instead of adding a table for a new thing, we just add a record. Okay? So we're trading complexity on the graph for the ease of configuration. So again, we're prioritizing configuration over customization. Yes?
You have a table, you have your party table, but you also have a table for each role with the specific information, like a student table with their specific information, and a teacher table with their specific information.
Right, so that's a great question, yes. So yes and no. So the question is, do we have tables with specific information for particular roles? And the answer is sometimes. It depends on how important that role is in the system. So in our system, because we're education, teachers are actually pretty important. So they actually do have a table for teachers that has their party ID in there. We have a student table because that's important to education, and it has a party ID in there. So,
and that's largely for convenience and just working in FileMaker, so you don't like bash your head against the wall all day.
Yeah, when I read, if you do, and I do recommend getting Lynn Silverstein's book, the Data Model Patterns book, because he talks about these different levels of implementing the party model. And at the most extreme level, if you weren't using FileMaker and if you were somewhat masochistic, he doesn't create tables for those roles. That just becomes an attribute of, so everything. If I have, my faculty ID number or my faculty whatever, that just becomes an attribute of the party, which is kind of crazy. So we pull back from there and we say, hey, we're trying to be practical here. We're using FileMaker. We don't want to put like a million filtered portals on the graph just to show specific attributes. So, we create those tables, put those attributes in those tables where it makes sense.
We do have more roles than we actually have tables that represent them, for sure. There's some roles that it's just a key, essentially. Vendor. Well, we don't need to show the vendor. We just need to know it exists, that the person has a vendor role. That's it.
Yeah. So the party model, the way that we think of it is it's actually, at the core are these three things. It's the party, the role, and the relationship. So we say party model as a shortcut, but it's really party, role, relationship, because everything kind of hangs off of that. So in terms of relationships, again, we're in education. So for a teacher, there might be a relationship between a teacher and the school. and we want to know what that teacher's position is. In our fundraising system, they want to know the education level and what schools they went to for a constituent. So we have a table that holds that education level. So it can, if you look at a constituent, you can say, oh, he got his bachelor from San Jose State, got his master's degree from Stanford, got his PhD from Harvard, got a postdoc from Yale. You know, so they can keep track of all of that information. But that's all part of the relationship, because what it means is, what it can do is, we have a record for Yale, we have a record for Harvard. We can go to Harvard's record and we can say, who are all of our constituents that went to Harvard? And then we just have a list of them. And we didn't have to think of that ahead of time. It just happened because we create relationships between all of these things.
So far, so good?
So that's the core of the party model. The other benefit that we get off of here is when it starts dealing with addresses, emails, phone numbers, etc. Because what we do is we just attach those to the party. So that means that anything that's a party can have an address, can have an email. It just gets it. It inherits that functionality from the party. So what we do here is we have this party record and we connect it to something called a contact method. And this contact method record isn't necessary, but it's something that we do so that we can create a list of blended contact methods. So we can see all in one list. We can see phones, emails, internet addresses, etc. You don't have to do it this way. You could just put a party ID in the address table, a party ID in the email table, and that works perfectly fine. So our way is a little bit more complicated for reasons of how we want to display it for particular schools. So the way we've done it is we've got a party ID in here, and then we've got this generic field called a locator ID. And so a locator could be an address, could be an email, could be a phone, could be, you know, your Facebook account, could be anything in there. And that means that if I create a new party type, like we just created households last year, made it a party type, now households can have an address. And that solved the problem for us, because our schools were always asking us, what's the home address? And before, we had the home address attached to the parents. And then there was always a question, well, which parent's home address? You know, sometimes mom filled out the data, so she put the address with her. But then the school is like, you know, we're traditional. We want dad listed first. So they put dad first. Dad's got no address because he didn't fill out the form. And, you know, that was causing problems. And then we said, hey, you know, why not just create the household address? And so we created a household, made it a party type.
Everything else just works.
Right, and then we get an address with it. You're supposed to say brilliant.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Sorry, I missed my cue. This is not for everyone. All right, I'm not saying
what?
party model.
This is for everyone.
Stop. You're reading off the wrong sheet. It's not saying party model go home. Again, I want to make sure that I underscore this repeatedly. A lot of us have one customer, one client, whether we're in-house or a big project or whatever it is, and just, you know, you have a very specific domain and you know it and you love it, and that's like that. We are serving many institutions that all have different shades and variations of the same problem. And again, we don't know ahead of time until we get on site or until they say, hey, yeah, we want to implement this, what the domain problems are, right? And so this gives us a way of, again, defining and representing the reality on the ground in data rather than in structure. And that's really sort of the essence of what we try to do. We try to represent things in data rather than in structure. Eric, you have a question? Okay. So I know this got a little bit deep, but do you guys have a basic idea of what we mean by party model?
It's very valuable and very useful. Because we are doing CIM, we got a customer, we got a supplier, we got, they could be all created zero.
That's right.
Once we are doing some marketing campaign,
right.
Sometimes we don't want to release some data to the other guy.
Right. Yep.
So you create a lot of problems.
Right.
So hopefully that the party model can help.
And it reduces the duplication of structure, which is important to us, because when you duplicate structure, you encode information that is different enough that will cause you problems when you have type collision. You know what I'm saying? You've run into this before. How come my customer and my vendor don't have the same fields, the same attributes? Because, well, we did this in 2006, or we did it in 2007, and crap. Now we have to kind of merge and go backwards and kind of reimagine the universe and so forth. We try not to do that, and that's one reason. But again, to give it more context, let's say the problem today is I need to represent this thing called FileMaker group, right, in our CRM system. For us, it's literally maybe just creating a new record, a new type of party called group, and everything else just works. I can add people to it, I can add relationships to it, I can say, hey, Eric's my friend, I'm a friend of Eric, and all that just works out of the box. All right, you good?
I'm good.
Okay, so this is the data file, right? Let me go back to my slide, and then we'll kind of come back to this.
Okay.
And how do I do that?
Share your screen.
Share my screen.
Click on you. Oh,
it's not
there. Do I have to make you
presenter?
How do I do that?
We switched to Zoom a couple years ago, and now we can't remember GoToMeeting to save our lives.
That's how you got in there in the first place.
How do you switch presenter? I know this is a dumb question.
I'm going to do it. I'll make you presenter.
Awesome. Okay. Yay. Okay. Okay. So party model. Party model is not simple, right? And honestly, I only feel really confident talking about it after having beat this thing to death for the last 10 years. I would say year 1 and year 2, we're like, I don't know, man. What the hell are we doing here? Year 3 is like, okay, this can actually work. Year 4 is like, we've got 100,000 records in here. Does this thing hold up? We've got 200,000 records in here. Does it hold up? Year 5 is like, oh, crap. Searches are hard because, your model's abstracted. You can't do quick, simple finds and simple shallow joins, and you got to kind of do workarounds, and you got to rethink your UI, and then FileMaker 12, 13, 14 kind of catches up to it. And now we're at 17. I kind of finally feel like, the ideas that we started out 10 years ago and the capacity of the FileMaker has sort of kind of converge, right? And so I'm feeling pretty excited about where we are today. But again, the goal here is to be both modular and generalized. Modular in the sense that, as Corn said before, when we drop in a module, we're not changing the core, right? All the people stuff, all the address stuff, all the relationship stuff, the way we link people and connect things together doesn't change. We're just dropping an application that deals with a domain problem, whether it's admissions, whether it's fundraising or alumni management, whether it's a special tool for a curriculum office or whether whatnot. We just say, hey, just tie into the party model and everything else works. In order to do that, however, what we've had to do is to build more abstraction. Yeah, right? Because you can't just tie it in. What does that mean in FileMaker? Right? You're still bound to the graph at some level, so you can't escape that. But what we can do is to say, hey, let's try not to re-implement things that already exist in the core. So if I want to add a relationship, the core knows how to add a relationship, so I don't want to reinvent that. So I'm going to use that. Right? So it's for that reason that we've kind of developed or kind of focus on what we call the API layer in FileMaker. Again, this falls in the category of things that I feel really confident talking about today because we've been beating at it for many, many years. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it looks like because this is going to be important later.
When did I do that DevCon presentation on party model? That was
07.
07. So we've been doing this for 10 years now. And when I first did the DevCon presentation on the party model, it was sort of new to everybody. And now there's a lot of people doing it. It was new to us. And we had that was sort of my baptism by fire. It's like, oh, I'm presenting on this. I better actually know it. And, lucky for me, it actually happened. I figured it out. And, I don't know my password. Oh, there is no password. Don't tell me my best.
I blame the developers. I'm giving you a lecture on security short.
That's actually next. Okay.
Maybe that's why they rejected my proposal for security.
You know,
No.
and well, Corn's setting up here. You look, we're here because we want to tell some war stories, and a lot of you are going to be trying out the party model, and we've been beaten up by this for a while, and I want to kind of share some of the lessons learned and so forth. And so this is not about just, hey, this is great. This is not cheap. You have to kind of be careful.
How do I
make you share?
No, I am a share.
Okay.
You have to get out of full screen and
you have to get out of full screen. I have
There
to
we
do that, and
then you have to go to your GoToMeeting.
And then I have to.
There.
Is it sharing?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Good. And I'm going to hide this guy here.
Yep. Perfect. So this is our fundraising module, which we haven't actually updated from FileMaker 13, I think. This is one of the problems that we have as having products is that as I would like to update all the time. I look at the work that I did yesterday and I think it's utter crap. So I'm always trying to update, and Ernest is always holding me back because he's like, if you change that, then we have to change all the documentation, all of the videos we've shot are worthless, and the customers are going to be confused. So we end up sort of updating on these 2 or 3 product revision cycles. So we had, the FileMaker 11 version, then the FileMaker 13 version. Then we were sort of going through the FileMaker 16 version, which is the current rev that we were doing, and then FileMaker 17 came out. Now we're like, oh, do we keep going 16 only, or do we put some 17 stuff in there? Some of our clients, because they're conservative schools, they're like, I don't know if we're ready to go 17 yet. We've already built our profiles and we're going to blast it out to all the faculty machines. Now I have to rebuild, so we tend to kind of hang back one version behind. So this is not using anything from 16 or 17 yet, but it will be. But there's a couple of things I feel excited about. One of them is, this is a pattern that we've used a lot, this master detail pattern. So we do a search over here, and we've got this list of records that are returned as part of the search. And we can kind of click through there and look at that record. This was so much work. This required tables on the graph. This required scripts. This required, there's so much stuff that was required just to do this, just to get this list back. We used Todd Geist's his hyperlist module, to efficiently get that list back, stick it in a global field, drive this portal, and then there's still problems. So what happens when the user goes off and does their own find? What happens when they don't do a find, but actually get here from like a go-to-related record or something? You have to come up with all these contingencies, and you have to do script triggers and layout. And then master detail came out in 17. And I was like, I can just throw all of that away and essentially have my search, instead of doing all of this, running the script or anything, all it has to do is like a quick find. And I've done that, and I'll show that in the academics solution. But I was so excited when that came out, because at first, I looked at it and I said, I'm never going to use this. And then when I realized how much work I don't have to do for it, and as I've gotten older and been doing this longer, I'm getting lazier and lazier. So the more that FileMaker does for me, the better I am.
One of the patterns, but this is a good module to look at because it does all the things core CRM.
Uh-oh. Doesn't know where admission system is. Oh, we'll ignore that.
It does all the things that, let's look at relationships here. So here, we have to add people, we have to add constituents, which is the role or the thing, and we have to add relationships. We've got to connect people to other people and so forth. And, we do stuff like, hey, I want to add a person, and this thing pops up. Like, and what is this thing here? This is actually a dialog box, a dialog, experience that opens up. And
I don't know who I have in here.
Doesn't really matter.
Oh, I got some code.
And two things. all our modules and apps have access to the dialog. It's a global, right? And it doesn't live in the advancement module, although we have a specific implementation of it that's advancement specific. But if you stick any proof module into the ecosystem, it can just call this from anywhere in the system. Right. You want to talk about APIs stuff.
Right. So what this is doing is this is calling an API that says I need a relationship, and what that does is this provides a dialog to search for people, and you can kind of see here that I've got this list of things under here. So I can see all of the roles for that person, because a lot of times, when you have 250,000 records, as some of our clients do, there's going to be a lot of people who have the same name. And if you're adding like a vendor relationship or adding a constituent, you want to know, are they already a constituent? If I've got all these different people, how do I distinguish between them? I can look at their roles and get a sense. Oh, this person's a constituent. That's the one I'm looking for. This person is a solicitor. That's the one I'm looking for. So here I can look through these things. I can also filter these by the roles, and this data has a whole bunch of roles. One of the things I should say is that roles are different things. So we have roles that are like family relationships, so mother-daughter. We have roles that are like, employee-employer. We have roles that are babysitty and no, that's not one of our default roles. So we have all of these different roles, and these roles, because they're just data, they can be anything.
And user-definable.
User-definable. And then now I've chosen this person, and it goes to this other screen. It says, what kind of relationship is this? I found the person, and maybe I'm second cousins with that person. Or maybe this is my admissions contact. Or I'm the admissions contact for this person, and they're the student. Way down here. There we go.
It's normally not this deep for demo purposes.
Right. This is all just loaded up with junk from everywhere. And so now I've created this relationship between these two people. Maybe. Or maybe I broke it. Uh-oh, that's really sad. I know.
Do you have a record for each role?
We do. So there's a role table that has a record for each role. That's why I can't find any relationships. This always works on the server, and then you bring it locally. I'm probably missing a file reference. Ignore the man behind the curtain here.
I wouldn't worry about it.
What's that?
I wouldn't worry about it.
Ah, okay. I won't worry about it then. If you don't worry about it, I won't worry about it.
We'll show it again later. It works.
It does work. So what it does is it creates relationships of any type. What I wanted to show was the ability to edit those relationships and show you how you can actually define different roles. So those relationships are also available because they're all using the same core system. They're also available in our academics module. So if we had a student who became a graduate and therefore became a constituent for the fundraising office because they didn't take enough money from you when you were a student there, all of those relationships are just immediately available as they move through the system. So they come in as an admissions candidate, and maybe the only relationships I have are mother, father, and maybe a sibling. Then they come into academics, I get a few more relationships, they go into advancement, and now they want to know, who's your doctor, who's your second cousin, does any of them possibly have any money that they could give?
Which won't go towards your education.
I have a kid that's going to college now, so this is a touchy topic for me. Yes.
I'm sure many of us, this is really relevant to a lot of us because we do need to establish some sort of relationship, role relationships between one entity and another.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's multiple relationships.
Yes.
But I'm thinking that there must be some sort of error trapping for when roles are not consistent. A person can't be a mother to somebody and also a child of somebody.
Right.
Or an alumnus and also a student, or, well, they can
Well,
be a student.
they can be. They can be. So typically, that's defined on the actual solution level. So in some cases, the roles are very strict. So in our education solution, you can't teach yourself. But I don't know, maybe some other system can. So we don't put those types of restrictions at the core. We typically do those types of restrictions at the edge, because that's where the rules are defined.
So we're talking customization rather than
sometimes.
Yeah, some customization. It depends. Again, we create products, so our products know some of those things ahead of time, because we've worked in the domain and it's a domain-specific solution. But sometimes they have a specific role that they're adding, and they have specific rules. For example, with our fundraising solution, they have a rule where you can't be a solicitor if X, Y, and Z. And so we have to put that rule into the system that says, if I try to add you as my solicitor, it actually checks to make sure that you're capable of being my solicitor.
And we won't get very deep into this here, but there's a whole configuration section where we can define on per group basis what the relevant reciprocal relationships are on each role basis. So what you saw there with the long list, that doesn't actually exist, and that doesn't actually happen in production environment. Right? That's just demo data. So when we deploy, say, the advancement module, the application here, it has its own constraint set of validated roles already that you can pick from.
Right.
And that's just how we implement it. You guys can do whatever you want, and so that there's no rules here. It's just whatever you need, to make things happen. But what's important here is that relationships do work, right? It was just, and it's the same relationships data. So if you drop a new module and it just looks at the relationship data, we'll see exactly the same thing.
Oh crap! This is my home address on there. Oops. Nobody send me any hate mail.
But the point is, there's this abstraction here. So again, we're representing relationships as data rather than structure, right? So that's the key thing. But if you think about that, that's fairly complex, right? What does that mean? How do we do every time we go and implement an application or a module, if you have to rewrite how you build relationships every time or re-implement it, that gets, I would blow my brains out, right? So the answer to that is APIs, right? So the whole point of this is we've been doing a lot of APIs, and I'm going to touch on it a little bit because it has relevance to where we're going with 17 and how we handle APIs.
When we go into APIs. Into APIs, all right. Is anybody here familiar with something called the N-tier architecture model? No? Oh, great. I guess. What's that? The letter N hyphen TIER. Does anybody here know who Andy Lacasse is? Okay. Because he presented at DevCon in this, I think it was back in 2010 maybe. He did this whole thing about the N-tier architecture model. And the idea with N-tier is that you've got these different tiers to your application. And we've chosen 3 tiers, which is sort of the most common one. So the 3 tiers are your data is the first tier. Second tier is the application view. So in this case, I'm looking at our registrar module here. So this is an application view of my data. And then the third tier is what's called the business logic tier. And that sits in between the data tier and the view tier. So that's so the business logic tier is the one where you actually implement the rules, where I say, no, you can't be a mother to your mother. So that's the tier that sits in the middle. it's also how we've decided to develop things to make life easier for ourselves. So when I was looking back at the folder structure here, I'm going to look at academics. Stretch this out a bit. So even within academics, we have these different modules. We have our registrar module, we have our scheduling module, we have our attendance module, and what you'll see is that we also have these different files for each of these. So I've got an API file here, I've got a database file here, and then I've got my UI file here. Same thing here, we don't have an education module, but because for academics, the education core doesn't have its own UI, but it does serve all of the rest of the system. So we didn't actually build an application for that, but we still have the database and we have the API layer. The API layer is where we put all of our scripts. And so if we want to create a new something, or if we want to edit something, or if we want to do whatever, delete it, transform it, all of that logic happens at the API level.
So for those of you who are dabbling in or working extensively with REST APIs, the analogy is very similar, right? So you have all these methods, it does stuff, it creates, it gets, you post, you put, you're acting on an object in a variety of ways. And we've basically have an analogous kind of thing in FileMaker where the APIs have things that you can do to your models essentially behind the scenes, and that's how we expose those functions to everything else in the universe. So we're never going to the database directly to do a new record. Right? So when we say I need a new student, there is an API that handles the creation of a student. If I need a new teacher or whatever it is, those are all API level stuff. That's what we're talking about. So the reason, and it's not just core model stuff, right? It's also UI APIs. Like if I want to look up a person, there are application APIs that bring functionality, make functionality modular so that anything can just call it and it just kind of works.
Sure. So the API file, if I look at the graph, it's a fairly bare bones relationship graph in terms of the model. And then most of it, somebody asked about if we're using selector connector. In the API files, we use what some people call magic key. Have you heard of that term before? So it's where you're using a global field and you stick a key in there and then you can get it to a related record or multiple related records. So we use that a lot in our system.
We call it the locator pattern, but
I hadn't heard the term magic key when I came up with it, and then I discovered that I wasn't the first one to come up with it, and that made me sad. So I called it the locator pattern, but essentially it's like magic key. So I have a number of globals. The other thing is we have a global generally per table. Sometimes it's shared between a couple of tables, and there's a reason for that. There's a performance thing. If I just have one global field that I'm using for everything, as soon as I put a value in there, FileMaker is trying to resolve all of the relationships attached to that global. So that's pretty slow. If you have multiple globals, then FileMaker is only going to try to resolve the relationships attached to that one global. So what we end up having is like this key here has only got maybe one or two table occurrences hanging off of it. That way FileMaker is not doing a lot of work when I populate that key. It also helps keep it straight in my head, what key did I put into what field and everything. So typically, a lot of the stuff that's done in here is we just have some scripts. There's no UI in the file. There's just bare bones layouts with maybe a couple of fields spattered on there, maybe no fields on there. It's just sort of whatever we've put on there that seems useful to us, at the time. Like if I'm trying to debug something, I might throw fields in the layout, but there's no need for those fields on the layout, and we often don't have fields on those layouts. So here I have an API script here that creates a new academic year. So when I'm in the system, in academics, let's see, do I have that up? I do. I might need to create another academic year. So, in fact, I do need to create another academic year. Because the 2017-2018 school year is over, so I need to create another one. When I press this button here, what this is going to do is actually call the API script to create that record for me, and then it's going to return the key value of that record back to me.
What it actually does is calls the control script, calls the API script.
Yeah. Oh, it's so complicated.
But the point is, we don't repeat the business of making an academic year elsewhere, right? I mean, like, there's one way to do an academic year, and everybody that needs to make an academic year, you use that one way, so you don't make a wrong academic year, because that would be really, really bad.
All right. You have a question?
You just pass that sort of stuff with like script parameters to the control script, it handles those.
We do. So the control scripts, it depends on what we're doing. Sometimes there's no parameters, sometimes there are. So like if I'm going to make a term, well, I need to know what academic year I'm making that term for. So it'll pass the academic year to the control script. It'll create the term, bring back that term ID, and then I can tell it what term that is. So I can tell it, oh, this is semester 2, or this is semester 3. I hate schools that say semester 3. Drives me nuts. Doesn't make any sense, right? This trimesters at that point, right? The 3rd semester. I don't know. And they're educating your children. I just want to point that out.
Same difference.
Yeah. So those API scripts actually do all of the work. So, whenever we need to do something with the model, the script in the UI file is not actually going to a layout, creating a record, putting stuff in there, and doing the work. We're always handing that off to an API. Yep.
I just want to be clear, when you say API, are you talking about an actual FileMaker script?
Yes.
Are you talking about where you define something and using insert URL to do?
Yes.
To both.
Yes, to both. So our API files handle both things. So when we're going to get there a little bit later, but so he's asking if, when we say API, are we talking about FileMaker scripts, or are we talking about things like, using the FileMaker data tool? And the answer is yes to all of those things. The API file is where all of that logic lives. So as a result, anytime that we want to extend the logic, so if we create a web application that works with our academic system, that web application is tied in at the API layer.
So we started this before JSON support, before, anyway. The point is, there are a lot of cool things today that make a lot of this a lot easier, and that's what we're really excited about. But this is why, right? So this is what it kind of looks like.
Basically the APIs. So one of the things is that the API file doesn't draw a window on the screen. All of this happens behind the scenes. And this really helps, so that because we don't have to worry about, like, do we put this window off screen? Do we
and then they have a big giant monitor and it's not off screen?
Yeah, exactly. We just discovered we have a client that has one of those really wide monitors, and things that you thought were off screen, it's like, oh, it's 4,000 pixels. Nobody has, nobody ever is going to have a 4,000 pixel wide monitor. So this all happens off screen. This happens headless. And so what it does is it basically, it has to, the APIs don't have a context. There's no inherent layout because I'm calling a script here. So the API script has to set its context. It has to go to a layout. It has to get the data that it's going to operate on, and then it returns a value. At no point does an API, a data API, actually do anything on the screen. It only takes parameters and it only returns a return value.
And so when our internal implementation team goes out and implements a product solution, or do you have to extend it, they don't write their own new academic year script or whatever it is. We know to call an existing one wherever possible, and so that if there's an underlying change to the way we handle the business logic of academic years, it just works all the time.
Are you familiar sort of with some of the tenets of API calls? One of the things with APIs is that they never change. You can deprecate them and say, hey, we're not using this API anymore, we're going to delete it. But it really provides some stability to your code, because I know that this script here I've got, create new academic year. It's always going to take a school ID, which is, you can think of as like a campus or something like that, a different location. And it's going to take the name of the academic year and then the label, which is sort of the shortened version of that. And that API, it doesn't matter what we do on the back end. If we change the model, if we make academic years work in another way, anything that calls this script is going to rely on those three things, and it's always going to get back the same thing. And so that's really freed us up, because the model is always changing behind the scenes. I don't have to worry when I'm creating a new module, like when I'm creating the after school module, I don't have to worry about how academic year creation happens. I just call this script. And so that's really beneficial for the rest of our team members. Like we just had, they called it the auxiliary module. And it's basically like during the summer, they have a program, a summer school program, and they have to create academic years for the summer school. Well, they just call this script, and then it's reliable for them.
And it's not just academic years, obviously. It's like relationships, it's all the core stuff, it's anything that the core system supports. Yeah. So your implementation responsibility then becomes very focused, right? You're not trying to reinvent the entire, suite of things that you need to do to just get something to work.
So the other type of APIs that we have, or the way that we think of them, are UI APIs. So I'm going to show you our scheduling module. There's this period at the beginning of each semester or trimester where the kids get to change their classes. And so we've created what's called this drop add module, because often what a school will do, what will happen is the registrar has a line of kids out the door, down the hall, angry parents on the phone, complaining about their kid's schedule. Why didn't they get this class? Oh, they hate this teacher. We've got to change this. We've got to change that. So we've created this module called, this functionality called drop add. And what it allows us, registrar to do is to try to fix a kid's schedule to give them what they want. But oftentimes they have to kind of start moving things around because they don't know if they add this class, well, do they have room in their schedule for this class? Or maybe if I move Spanish into this period, then I can fit this thing. Oh, but if I move Spanish there, I have to move history. So we created this module that lets them do that. And the way that this works is basically they have a list of all the periods across here. They've got a list of all the classes that the kid currently has. And maybe the kid doesn't like this teacher for Intro to College Statistics. So that's great here because I can just move them to this one. They've got nothing in period 6. So I'm going to move this kid to period 6 statistics. But sometimes when they want to move somebody, they have to actually flip them around. I might have a class where I've got to move this to period 5, but I'm actually taking religions of the world in period 5. Maybe I put this in period 1, and then I have to move this to period 3. It's a lot of complex things that they have to do. So this is one of the things that the registrar does in the system. And oftentimes they have to look and say, well, what classes can I actually take? And so one of the, can't actually see it on here. Still can't see it. Anyway, there's a button down here that says Add Course that pops up this window that allows them to search for things. They can search for courses and things like that. So this is implemented as an API. So anything that wants to add a course can pop open this window and add it to that kid's schedule if they want. Likewise, sometimes what the registrar is doing is they are looking for a specific kid. So I know the kid's number maybe, or maybe I know the kid's name. I don't remember any kids' names. There, Ryan Thomas Garcia. So maybe there's a group of kids that I want to work with. I want to work with Thomas Garcia. I want to work with Elizabeth, somebody or another. I can't remember her last name. Oh, Harris. I want to work with that student as well. And that Elizabeth as well. So when she's working in drop add, she might see, who the next 3 kids are, coming in her door. And so she wants to load them up ahead of time so that once she deals with one kid, then she can just move on to the next one. So we've implemented this functionality where she can search for students, grab like 2 or 3 students at a time, and then work with them. But one of the things that she said was sometimes she knows all of the kids who need to take a particular class. So if I have, this is not the right year, I'm going to take French for 2017. Excuse me. Sometimes she already knows who she wants to put in French. She knows it's going to fit in their schedule. She doesn't need to go through drop add and kind of try things on and see if it's going to fit or not. She's like, these kids are getting French come hell or high water. And she needs to find those kids to add to it. So we give her a little button here to add kids, and it's the exact same window. And doing it this way, using APIs and thinking of student selection as a service, where I can look for, that Elizabeth kid again. Doing it this way means I didn't have to actually do anything. All I had to do was call that script, and what that script will do is when it's done, it's going to return me all of the student IDs that I selected here. So whether I'm in drop add doing that, whether I'm looking at a section and adding kids to that section, I use an API script that provides both this window and sends me back the data that I'm working with. Then I'm going to call a data API that actually adds those students to the class.
The key word there is service, right? So one of the proof, I think I'm going to take back the screen.
Don't worry. I have to give it to you.
Yeah. So I know that was a lot, but this is why this matters with 17. We've been consciously trying to think of ourselves as developers, as a services first developer, right? And that's our mission, right? And I know it gets complicated because we tend to think of, hey, you're developing a UI, you're developing a data model, you're developing all those things is true, but as the mission of proof developers, as the first order of business, is to provide APIs to other people within our organization and potentially to other developers who tap into our stuff as well. And that's really the core foundation of the entire architecture philosophy that drives almost everything that we do. So if you crack open our files, you want to know how things work, you go straight to the APIs. That tells you how things work. And guess what? If you're doing your REST stuff today, right, you don't care how OneLogin or Evernote or whatever, Google Maps, whatever you use actually models the freaking data. You just ask what API is available. That's exactly the same mentality, right? Now, the good news is this was kind of hard before, the last couple of years. Not impossible, but hard, right? Because you're inventing your own ways of handling inputs and outputs. You go to different developer, we use name parameters. We use positional parameters. There's like no standard. And one of the great things about 16 and 16 plus, which is aka 17, is that I kind of think of those things as kind of one continuous product, even though FileMaker doesn't probably like that. But anyway, 17, aka the brand new world here, gives us a lot of those tools that we are slowly kind of packing back into the system to really make it a lot more robust. Right? All right, so real quick, let's see. Do I still have 2 hours?
Yeah. 40 minutes.
FileMaker API. So we do a lot of APIs, and APIs between everything. Our modules access each other through APIs. They don't talk directly to the data model, although it's still FileMaker. So if you need graph work, you still have to kind of bring tables into the local files, which we're hoping will change in some future version. But for now, that's what it is. We talked about party model. We talked about party roles and relationship. What does all this matter, right? Why are we here talking about FileMaker 17 and all this? Well, in case it hasn't been clear, This stuff is complex. It's big. We have a lot of files. We have a lot of tables. We have a lot of different quote-unquote modules. And imagine if I wanted to upgrade a school, what that used to look like. We have some databases that are gigabytes large. We just did a migration. The journal database alone, which is one data table in 100 tables, one very large one, was 67 gigabytes. Right? Now, some of you was like, pshaw, I've seen more, right? But whatever. I mean, I looked at that as like, how do you transfer that stuff? I mean, we all work remotely. I mean, you're sucking it down over the air. It's like, okay, let's watch this progress bar go. It's not impossible, right? I mean, short of going to the server, jacking in the thumb drive, and I mean, we really timed it. Like, it's faster for somebody to drive down to the client, put the disk in, take it out, go back, do the conversion, and put it back than to wait for Dropbox to sync.
The client was 6 hours away, by the way.
That was 6 hours away, right? And guess what? All our clients are like that. So we got 30 schools to update in a year on a rotation. We'll still be updating and transferring files today, right? So when FM data migration, so now I'm going to switch to part 2 of this whole thing, which is we've got this complex stuff. We have a lot of doubts about, well, this is too complex for FileMaker. God help us, what have we done? This is crazy. We'll never be able to make this work. And then FileMaker 17 comes along. Right? It's like, oh, maybe this does work, right? Because FileMaker data migration tool is freaking awesome. And I'm the skeptic in the organization. It's like, fine, FileMaker, it's 80% implementation, right? This is going to suck because it's going to do 90% of what you want, and 10% is going to be so hard and so stupid that you're like, whatever, I'll just write my own thing. Right? We've all been there, right? But FileMaker data migration tool, if you haven't used it, please go try it out. It is awesome. It's awesome because it's fast. We did a 250 megabyte core DB conversion of something like, 20 tables.
I don't remember how many tables. I don't remember how many records.
40-something tables. It was, it's big. It's 200,000 records. Megabytes compressed, 256 megabytes compressed, 2 minutes, and that's with it spitting out the log. And that's with us like doing it over the air and remote sessioning. Now, this isn't great, right? And this is the worst case scenario that we've been. 67 gigabytes of assets. Don't ask me why. It was an old decision I didn't make. 67 gigabytes of assets that held us back in a migration scenario for years because we would start our own custom migration in 16 and 15, and it would just run. 3 days later, it's running. And you know what? That's not even the bad part. The bad part is when it craps out on you at hour 48, and you go, what went wrong? Right?
It wasn't our fault. We didn't know the client had only partitioned like 150 gigabytes for the drive. I mean, this was like some 24-core Windows server, and I'm like, 150 gigabytes? That's it?
And the worst part of it is that you just don't know, right? You just don't know when the thing will end. So you don't know whether they get hung in a loop when you're trying to do a set field, or the import just like bombed on some corrupted data or record somewhere, and now you have no idea.
That import dialog is logarithmic, I think. I'm pretty sure. Like the first 100 records go in a second, and the next 100 are 2 seconds, and the next 100 are 10 seconds. I swear, because that's what it looked like when we were trying to import 67 gigabytes into a new file. And then, we're actually going over all of it, like, what are we going to do here? Maybe we don't have to import this. Maybe what we can do is take all of the changes that we've done to this file and re-implement it in their file. So they've had this system for 9 years. So we're thinking, we'll patch 9 years worth of improvements and changes into their file. And, we were preparing to do that. And then Ernest said, hey, let's try the migration tool. And I said, go ahead. You do that. I'm getting ready to patch.
Yeah, who's going to win? Right? I was like, okay, I'll take that bet. And again, I didn't we didn't know, when this was really early in 17s, and this, if you guys were ETS or whatever, you've seen maybe the data migration tool and whatnot. Because I can't really talk about that. But I was always like skeptical and worried to throw this against a production environment, right? Because it's nice that it's purportedly fast, but are you going to risk 67 gigabytes worth of data in a migration tool that requires you to clone the file and do all that? Right? But in this case, like I had no choice. Like, it was either 6 days and maybe this will work, or let's see what happens.
Oh, by the way, they want it to only be down for an afternoon. We forgot to mention that. Yeah. They're like, we're going to leave at 3. You'll have this done by 8 a.m., right?
Again, this is worst case scenario. Not all of files are 67 gigabytes. This happens to be like, whatever, right? 5.5 hours. And again, this is crazy fast. I cannot be more gushy about this because I've never been able to do my work in an afternoon for something this large in a migration scenario FileMaker. Right. And that alone for me is worth a 17 upgrade. I feel like I'm a FileMaker sales guy here, but yeah, absolutely. Okay.
The other thing that after Ernest was done, I said, all right, so I'm going to go back in and do the security because, they've got their own custom passwords and things. And I went in to do the security. I was like, oh, it's already there. What? It was kind of a trip because I'm putting in my password, I'm putting in the developer password, and it's not working. I'm like, what is going on? And then I just happen to put in the client's password, and it opens up. And I look at the security, I'm like, oh, they even thought of the security. And I checked it, and I made sure, like, oh, well, I renamed this table, and this had oh, that worked too. I was amazed, and I'm not easily amazed. Ernest says that he's the skeptical. I'm even more skeptical than him.
He never gets anything done.
Yeah. But I was pretty impressed with the migration tool, just at how easy it was, and especially with the other file, because this was the first file that was the blocker, and then the core DB file. I was like, okay, so we'll run this one for a couple of hours, and 2 minutes later, I'm like, oh, I can put this into production.
So really, in our scenario, again, big enterprise, really complex, many tables, many files, whatnot. We think that given this worst case scenario, we can do an entire client migration, most of the time within minutes.
People are creating shell scripts, Python scripts to walk over the
So like everybody else, we looked at that and said, hey, if that works, why not automate it, right? It seems like the obvious thing. So as a FileMaker developer, it's like instincts, let's build a FileMaker interface and we'll just click buttons and we'll just do all the migration for us. And we spent some time like going back and forth in our internal development team to kind of think through why this matters and what we want to do. And there are tons of little helper files or freebies that are out there now that people have developed to kind of give you access to the scripts, and even Python and even other wrapper scripts in your language of choice, JavaScript, whatever, to do this. But for me, the problem that has always bugged us was not just so much the idea of just migrating the file, right? It's how do you automate an enterprise class or a product class deployment DevOps flow. You guys know what I mean by that, right? So if you develop in any other language, maybe you've done some Python, some JavaScript, and you've got a Git, environment that you're committing your code to, and you're pushing up the server, and you're pulling it down, and you've got a dev server, and you've got a test server, and it automatically deploys to it, and maybe you've got continuous integration built in where it automatically runs your tests and does everything right, and then says, good, you're good to go, and you can deploy that tag, right? That's really beautiful, awesome stuff, right? That's the kind of thing that we were trying to do, except we're never able to do because there's no way to migrate the data easily, right? Now again, is this how I imagine migration working in FileMaker? No. Right? I imagine migration working more like, say, in a web framework in Node.js or Python, where you literally build the migration scripts. Like you type in, this table became data, this object became data, and so forth, and it just runs that, right? So this is way more abstracted than we even imagined it to be. But for the first time, I can see us building basically not just a migration UI, but a DevOps UI. right? So imagine if you can pick your server, you can pick your modules, your files, and you can build a migration plan that said we're going to go from version 2.5 of this module to version 4 of this module, and you can automate all that with a click of a button. Wouldn't that be cool? Right? So again, the idea is that you actually have some kind of commit, some kind of test, you run some migrations, you run some post-migration scripts because, these are clones. You can't touch them until you're done, so it's a little bit backwards, but that's okay. You can at least test them. And then you can see whether they pass or fail, and then rinse and repeat, and when you did, you have a tag. And this is important for us because, again, I go back to what I started out earlier, is that internally, we have development and we have an implementation team. The implementation team needs to know what's stable and what's good, right? We want to get out of the business of saying, Corn, is the file ready yet? Is it stable? What's stable?
It's
I don't
never
know.
ready. It's never ready.
We don't know, right? We want to separate the business of selling the stuff from the business of making the stuff so that the velocity of putting things out there go faster than working at different speeds, essentially, right? Does that make sense? So I have a sneak peek for you guys there. So we've been working on this thing called the FM DevOps tool for proof. I don't know whether we'll release it publicly or whatnot, but it's an experiment. It's like, wow, this is cool. Migration tool is cool. It's really fast, right? Maybe we can wrap all these things that we've been trying to do into a single application. So don't get too excited. It only partially works. Yeah. It is absolutely a FileMaker solution. It's absolutely 100% FileMaker solution. It doesn't look like it, right? But again, 17 and master detail, which we'll talk about in a second, and all those things are coming together to really give us these things to do some really cool things. So I think I have it open here. Not that one. That one. So it's real. It's not all vaporware, but it's not fully baked yet. But the idea is, we're starting to kind of imagine us abstracting the way we manage versions and controls and files and our servers, and we have all the servers here, the Triton 1, 2, 3.
Those aren't real servers. Don't tell people that.
Obscured password. Okay, don't go there. I'm going to gloss over this, but the idea is that not only do we want to deploy and do commits and testing, what we want to do is give the implementation team a way of deploying to the client on demand. So you can fire this up, you can pick the deployment scenario you want, click go, downloads the file, does all the migrations, and we know it's going to work because we've tested it before in our release cycle. And maybe it takes 5 hours in the worst case scenario because it's a huge data, but whatever, it works.
Before, it took us renting a hotel room, coming on site, maybe flights, I don't know. The office is down for 2 days, they can't do anything. We're sitting there trying to, first we're, import. I have these files that happened before the migration tool, where I basically have just, I don't know, about 600 TOs from all of the old, from the old set of data to the new set of data, and then 600 scripts to do those imports. And then another set of scripts for some of them because, I actually changed the way this data works, so I have to manipulate this data now. And now all of this is being automated here, leveraging the FileMaker migration tool so that I don't have to worry about the data anymore. Not having to worry about I don't know if anybody has worked with schools, but there are these roles in schools. There's like the registrar and the counselor. And it seems like we should have security, like this is what a registrar can do. This is what a counselor can do. That's not how it actually works in the school because the registrar, she's been here for like 38 years. She's about to retire and she doesn't actually like computers. So she should not be able to delete anything, even though like a traditional registrar should be able to delete a class and not this one. And so these schools have, had us put in all this custom security, and that has driven me nuts because that has prevented us from being able to do upgrades frequently because we had to go in and redefine all of this stuff. And now, since FileMaker has taken care of all of that, now it's just like managing files. That's it.
I don't want to be too exuberant because, again, we're cooking stuff in the kitchen. We think we're close.
What's our plans of it?
Yeah.
Is that a part of your selling module where you would say, maybe first week, second week, you only get 2 weeks or 3 weeks together? Or is that just your planning?
So that's a good idea. I'm going to take that home. I'll talk to the salespeople about this.
Right.
The plans in our mind, again, we're not settled with the terminology. We're still arguing about what these terms actually mean. But as demoed, the plan here is really a version to another version.
Right.
Because we have people that are on 2.6, on 2.7, different vintages of stuff, and the schema is slightly weird. And we have to handle each one independently. So sometimes you can go from 2 whatever to 4 immediately. Sometimes you can't. And so the plans are just to account for that sort of stuff.
Yeah. But we do. I mean, this is actually, that is a good question because this has been a selling point for us that we haven't really been able to deliver on because it takes so long to do these migrations. It's so much work. We tell the client, hey, you keep your maintenance up. You keep paying us every year. You can have, as long as you're paying your maintenance, you can have the next version free. Just whatever time it takes for us to move you from one version to another. If whatever time that takes is like 5 days, and then the free upgrade is actually 5 full days of my time, then the client's like, that's not actually free.
We have to charge you for that. Yeah, so what did you just do? I mean, that's like,
right.
And it's been weird, right? I mean,
yeah.
You guys understand.
So now with this tool and with the FileMaker migration tool, I don't know if we'll still charge for my time, but it's a nominal time now. It's like 1 day or half of a day or something like that. And then we can actually start doing like, hey, you want updates every year? Great, we can do that now.
And it also makes it so that the devs don't have to be involved in these things, right? I mean, the plan can be executed by the implementation teams because it's scripted and it's known and so forth. The take-home to all of this is not that you need this particular DevOps tool per se. Your scenarios are different and whatnot. I don't know. It's just, again, it's just a chance for Clara and I to kind of crawl out of a little imagination playground and to kind of ask some questions and to share some of the things we're doing. But I think one of the take-homes that I hope that people get from this is that, again, if you haven't tried the migration tool, and find a reason to work it in because it's pretty kick-ass, right?
I believe that the migration tool uses every thread.
I believe it because I've been seeing. We watched the CPU.
If you watch the CPU and you're watching every
core
on the box, and everything just spikes up, then it's using it.
So here's a tip, right? Again, lessons learned. Don't try to run a scheduled script while migration tool is running on the same box. I did that.
It will eat up, it will eat up the schedules scripts.
It also creates a temp file. I don't know what you've done this. So again, it's not, you don't do 67 gigabytes and presto, it just magically appears. It's building a huge invisible temp file of equal or less size as you're doing. So make sure you have at least double the disk space that you need to make it happen. For each file, exactly.
Some people might start up a Python script that spawns threads. Think about what we just said. All of that's going on at the same time. It's probably better just to do one file at a time. And because of the disk, and because we're already threaded already, so we're going to do each file as fast as we can.
You were saying that you were pulling this down on the air and stuff like that, so you're not running a local copy on the server?
No, we're running migrations on near to the server or on the server if available.
Yeah. Oh, we're pulling our clones from our development server to the client.
So downloading clones and running the process.
So you want to switch gears now?
I don't know. We've got other things to talk about, so this is just one thing, right? But this is an exciting thing because it sets the stage for a lot of other things.
The other thing about the migration tool, it only works on Chrome. As soon as you open file,
Don't touch it, right?
The file is no longer Chrome.
Right. Yep. And so, if you, again, for us, we were really worried about what happens after the data gets. Sometimes you change the schema, and it's not just a direct map, right? Like the data or whatever needs to be transformed. And so there are scenarios where migration alone is not going to be sufficient. You may have to write a post-migration transform routine or whatever it is to
Sadly, the migration tool didn't automatically make households for me.
That's right.
Out of the relationships. That would have been nice to say, oh, mom and dad, and put them in this household, except if they're divorced. I guess we didn't think of that.
And the other little thing here, and for those of you who have tried it, this will seem very obvious, is the logs are actually really useful. So if you want to just do a small migration on a small set of records, just to see what happens, it will tell you a lot about what will happen once you do the migration. So that was very helpful for us. Okay, so DevOps. Let's talk about UI a little bit, right? So I showed this thing, and it's got some. So while all this is happening, we've been on a track to kind of modernize the UI, and Proof has more or less settled on the Material I/O specification. Right? Do you guys know about Material I/O? It's Google's design spec essentially, right? And what's that? I wouldn't say that.
It's not. It actually is. It actually isn't. We've been looking at Material for a long time, and the reason that we settled on Material was because it's pretty mature. It has, if you go to the website, the Material design website shows examples, shows you what to do, shows you what not to do, and it does actually look at things like cross-platform guidelines. So they are considering like, well, we're Google, so we're doing this for Android, and the web is, platform agnostic anyway. But what happens if you're doing it for iOS? And they do have considerations for that. So we've been working on a new theme in FileMaker that we've called FM Material. And we're preparing to release this theme. We're thinking, oh, should we just use this internally? Should we let other people use it? Then FileMaker 17 goes ahead and creates their universal theme, which is pretty darn close to Material. So unfortunately, we've already started developing with our own, and it would be like starting over to go back to the FileMaker one. So we can't take advantage of that. So we're going ahead with Material, but if you don't want to, if we never release Material, if you don't want to bother doing it, the universal theme is actually pretty good. And we were sad that it took so. If they could just have done that in 16, it would have been perfect. They waited a little bit too long. So we've used the Material website to come up with this theme, and we're actually in the middle of doing this. So when I was looking here at this scheduling module, this is the old sort of unthemed. I'm going to show you the dirty laundry here. I don't know if you can see this. I'll zoom in. But that word there, okay, oops, lost it, sorry. For the theme, actually says classic. So we haven't been using any theming.
Was there a theme that was worth using before 16? Besides enlightenment, besides minimalist.
Minimalist, yeah.
Well, not using classic. You're actually slowing down your solution.
Right. So we're slowing down. So now, to be honest, this was built in FileMaker 7, so there's a lot of layouts to do. So we're kind of doing it one by one, going through and trying to replace it. So what we're doing is we're not actually retheming layouts. We're sort of creating a duplicate layout and then theming that and then sort of switching those layouts in place. So I don't know if you noticed, but this looks a lot different than the drop add layout. So the drop add layout is actually using our FileMaker Material theme. And it's made it a lot lighter. And now with FileMaker 17, I'm starting to see things get even lighter weight. The number of objects that are on the layout is just dwindling. I was just looking actually at, I go back over to this screen. This is one of the screens that I'm in the middle of retheming. And I went into layout mode and I just looked at just this little search bar here. You know, just to give it like this rounded look and have the word search there. This is all like FileMaker 13 technology, some 11 technology in here. You know, so I've got the search field. I've got this little text thing here that says search.
It's almost painful. That
has some conditional formatting on it because I didn't have hide object. That didn't come until much later. So what I had to do was make it like 500 point font, you know, to make it sort of disappear.
You guys have done that.
Everybody's done this. Nobody here, don't act like you've never done this before. And then I've got this rounded rectangle thing behind that so I can make it kind of rounded so it's not just these jagged edges. And then I've got, you know, my portal here that's using all this stuff. And then I started doing this in 17. I'm not going to say that. And I said, oh, I can just replace that one thing with just a field. My field can be rounded now. I can have a field hint in there, you know, so I can have the label appear that says search if the field is blank. So I've replaced all of this stuff, and plus the script that was running before that had to do all of the collation of records and all that. Now it's just it's a quick find. That's it. So just the weight of this layout, you know, I've removed scripts, I've gotten rid of layout objects, and everything is like that.
Now, and this was possible in 16. Right? So 16 was like the
well, except for this part.
Right. So 16 was like the inflection point for, in my mind, when things were actually worth really digging into, and that's when we started. But when 17 came with master detail, that's when a lot of these like gobbledygook stuff that we spend so much time and energy trying to replicate, you know, for the user.
Yeah. So like just setting this highlight here to make this like to show that that's the highlight. You know, so now I have to have conditional formatting on these fields. Here it's just I've got a, you know, active portal row, and that's it. You know, and I think that's brilliant because it means one less thing that I have to do. One, you know, less conditional formatting. All of that stuff is adding weight to the layout, and as a result, reducing performance.
And one less TO join of a lot of related records.
Yep.
For that join. That's huge for us. Yeah. Sorry.
You had a question? Sure.
How are you setting the scope of that?
Oh, this is just a global field. So specifically, when we set the scope of the academic year, we set a session global at the beginning, and then all of the finds are constrained by that global. So if I do a find for courses or if I do a find for students, it does that find, and then it constrains them to that academic year.
We use a properties list pattern, the P list pattern to load up globals.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it later.
And then academic years have dates, so I know because it's, you know, July 12th, which is actually, just want to remind everybody that I'm missing my wedding anniversary today to be with you. So,
East Coast, you already missed it.
I know. I sent a text to my wife, and she said, "Oh, it's our anniversary today." So, a little role reversal there.
You can always send her a nice Amazon gift certificate.
You're being recorded, so watch what you say.
So all of this stuff here, using FM material, has just made, you know, I think it also just looks nicer. You know, this looks really heavy to me. And using the material spec, you know, there's a lot more white space. The fonts are a little bit bigger. Our clients often complain about, you know, I have this eyesight where I run my laptop, this 13-inch laptop at Retina resolution. And, you know, Ernest comes over and looks and he's like, how the hell do you read that? So using the material spec, you know, it's sort of kind of given me a sanity check, so I know, oh, this is what normal people do. This is normal people size. So I'm pretty excited about using this theme here, and what FileMaker 17 in combination with the themes has really let us sort of. I was trying to look at the layout palette and just looking at all the objects, and had all these group buttons from pre-FileMaker 16 days, and now those are all just button objects. So the number of objects on my layout is about a third of what they were when I had developed all of them in Classic.
So it's 10 minutes to 9. I'm going to try to speed this up a little bit. All right. So we're talking about material. You don't have to. Yeah. It took me 3 tries to realize I don't have to quit sharing. He doesn't have to quit sharing. So material is important. Material is important because, again, I think the main theme here is that when you look at 17, it's like, wow, there's only 2 things that are worth anything. But these 2 things that are worth anything are really, really important things to us. And they make a huge difference. The other thing that was really important to us is run script by name, which I'm going to gloss over because I think you guys know how cool that is. Yeah. The only thing that I would say is that one of the things that we're actually thinking about doing, and we've been prototyping this, is to do callbacks in FileMaker. You guys know what callbacks are? Right? Callback function. So you run a script, you have a chain function that says when you're done with something, do something else. And that, again, that's important to us because our stuff is fairly modular. Sometimes we want things to continue to do something. The only thing that I don't like right now is that because FileMaker is by nature synchronous, right? Unless you do the server side, sometimes you can't let callbacks be entirely asynchronous, and that's kind of complicated. But we'll come back and do more on that later. All right. And there's some really cool patterns that you can apply, like you have an iterator pattern. So right now, let's say you want to send letters to 3 different groups of people. You may do 3 different finds, and then loop through the finds and do that. But what you can do now with the run script by name thing is actually apply a function to the same found set and to send different letters as you loop through that scenario. So those are the kinds of things that
Oh, you have to share your screen.
I have to share my screen?
Yes.
God damn. That just killed like 2 minutes. And you gotta stop.
I stopped.
You gotta make me.
You have to show. Oh,
God damn it. Go to meeting. We would go to meeting for years.
A decade.
A decade.
And how quickly we've forgotten.
Okay. I want to share something really cool with you guys that we've been working on. And this is like a culmination of all the cool things you can do in 17 and 16 that have dogged us for a really long time. So again, I started by saying, gee, we have all this like architecture and it's complex, hundreds of tables and big domains and modularity. What's the problem with all that complexity? I mean, with lots of relationships, one of the challenges we always deal with is performance, right? So you want to do a find in a flat FileMaker file. It's like instant, right? You put your field on there, you do a quick find, bam, bada bing, you're done. You have a complex data model with a party role relationship. You've got 4 or 5 joins behind the scenes. You got to loop all these things, do filters. The FileMaker feeling starts to get a little dodgy, right? And the more records you throw at the system, the more filters it becomes. The performance becomes problematic. So on the one hand, we say we're building for scale. The reality is that when you have lots of records and lots of complex joins in there, you're always managing the cost of this, of the configuration structure that you've put in place, right? And that's always been our trade-off. Like, oh my God, I wish we didn't do this in FileMaker because we need the architecture to support the domain, but then you were trading off the FileMaker experience and have to do all these workarounds to make the performance even seemingly worth using. But with JSON support, with data APIs, with master details and UX stuff, all these things are coming together. So one of the things that we're doing now is, I'm going to show you this. I've deployed an Elasticsearch server next to my FileMaker server. You guys know what Elasticsearch is? Elasticsearch server? Okay. A really short version of this is in the internet's web search space, documents are indexed for you to find, right? When you Google something, Google's not poking into a relational database to pull the records and joins for you. You guys heard of MongoDB and NoSQL DBs and all that. So it's basically a document search engine that drives a lot of the web search functionality out in the world today. And it's incredibly fast, right? I mean, imagine Google has indexed bazillions of things. How do they return that stuff to you that quickly over the internet? Well, it's because of Elasticsearch or Elastic type searches, document-based searching and indexing that's powering all this stuff. Right? You can do this too. There are lots of different companies and brands that do this. I like the stuff that we've been playing with are SQLite actually is built in a fast text search capability. So if you like SQLite, you can do that too. Postgres, if you're a Postgres person, there's actually a document storage that you can actually deploy. I'm using Elasticsearch, which is an open source. There's a paid version of this, but it's an open source technology that you can deploy for free today, download and do. And I have actually deployed this locally on my laptop, my little dinky 2014 laptop here. And I have indexed, as a demo here, 75,000 records, right? And imagine that all the fields here don't come from one table, right? It's because that's easy. I can do that today. And what I need to be able to do is return a data set quickly. And not only this, I need to match. I need to return it with a relevant score. And that's expensive to do in FileMaker, right? Because you get the data back and then you have to do this unstroke calculation ranking all the time. And you're using a portal filter or using whatever, and that's really slow. And that's been our pain, right? So I've deployed an Elastic server in the background. And I've pushed all this data into the server. And again, I'm not going to show you how I do it. It's basically, actually, I'm going to show you how I do it. Because you need to know. It's a REST API, right? Elasticsearch comes with a REST API built in out of the gate. So I'm using FileMaker's insert, URL, REST JSON support and JSON functions that are native now that you don't need a plugin for and all that. I'm constructing basically a JSON packet, and I'm injecting it into my Elastic server when there's an update on the record. Trust me on this, it's really fast. I did 75,000 records in here, just in a loop and in an inefficient way, and like not using the bulk script, but just like looping through instead of record. It took me like 5-10 minutes to do all of it. Okay? And that's on my dinky little laptop here. And then for future ones, it's fast. Like the first insertion, the first push of everything is going to be slower, but future updates is going to be anytime the record changes, you can just push it up, and it'll be lightning fast. So what you're basically building is a clone or a shadow database where its only job is to search. Right? So think about this, right? Why is this important to us? Right? We want to search on everything in the system, not just on a teacher, not just on the relationship, not just on whatever. We want to index our entire domain, and we want to do it in a way where the searches are inexpensive. So what we're doing now is we're offloading that to Elastic. And what does the FileMaker experience look like? So here's a demo. Again, I'm searching across the entire database. Like I'm doing all fields, all indexes, all documents, and do you guys see that?
Only index fields.
All fields that I've indexed in Elasticsearch. So unlike FileMaker, where you blow up your index or you index every field, I'm saying I don't care. I'm just taking all the fields that I want to index. I'm going to make Elastic do the indexing, and it's going to do the Levenstein scoring for me. It's going to do the vector scoring for me. It's going to do the relevance scoring for me, and it's going to return it with a query in a data API. And I'm going to just do this, and bam. Yeah, this is like obviously. This is ranked. This tells me what the highest ranked value return set is, and I'm not doing it in FileMaker, right? And what am I doing here? This has no This is one table. It's a virtual list. So we're applying all the years of old FileMaker technology to this. We're parsing a global return result set that I'm dumping the search results to. And the search is a simple search script that passes, that does a URL call, injects it into the global, displaying the virtual list. And the virtual list is a master detail, right? So I have one table, one layout, one global field, and you're done. And you don't even need to parse it out. I'm parsing out because I want to see the fields organized in a certain way. But you could obviously have a different way of, driving that.
Why does it always return?
Oh, that's because I put on one rows in my virtual list table that I'm using, and that can be dynamic or not. It doesn't really matter. You guys know what I'm saying here? This is just to drive the portal display here.
Have you used virtual lists? Okay, so the way virtual list does is you have all these generic records, and then you have a variable that has this whole data chunk in it.
But you're still only getting one.
Yeah, but so this is the beauty of Elasticsearch, right? I have way more rows here than I actually need because I don't need to return 100 records from Elastic. I'm returning the top 50 results that I want to display to the user, or whatever your pagination size that you want. That's right.
And you're saying only give me the first time.
Yeah, so I've set my record size to the page limit that I'm returning from Elasticsearch. It can be 5, it can be 10, it can be 100,000, whatever it is. And this is an arbitrary number that we chose. But it's basically how many rows I want to show the user at any given time.
So do you have next page functionality?
Not in this demo, but yes, obviously. So if you want to fetch next thing, return from server or whatnot. So I don't know. I mean, I want to have time for questions and whatnot, but do that again. Let's look for, I don't know.
Joe.
What? Joe? Oh, Joe's terrible.
I know Joe's terrible.
Joe's terrible, but it works, right? Always what? And the reason for that is, yeah, it gets a little bit technical, but the reason for that is,
oh, you've got it backwards.
For
your Levin's name, isn't it?
No, I index. I'm searching on not just the names. I'm searching on all the fields in this database because if I just restricted it to the name source values, it was actually a lot faster.
Does it search on partial?
Yeah, it's search on partial, yeah. So you can do stuff. You can do stuff like fuzzy and stuff like that, and you can do stuff like 2, 3. So again, there's some configuration that you have to do to tune what your searches return to you and whatnot. And this is just a very bare bones, like shotgun approach, like find me everything everywhere kind of thing. But the point is, I'm doing a find me everything everywhere on 70,000 records, and it's like that.
Then what do you do with it?
You do things like, remember what we showed you with a little picker where you can pick a person and do all that? That's what you do with this list, right? It becomes, and you can load it up with anything, right? You can load it up with all your objects in the system. And you can do lightning fast searches across the entire solution on a document basis. So if you haven't played with Elastic or SQLized version of this, and you're thinking, hey, I have a search problem and it's slow, or let me rephrase this. If you're deciding that you need to architect a solution for performance and give up actual modeling, like I need to make this flat because otherwise the user's experience is going to suck, we now have a different way of handling these kinds of problems.
So are you actually doing this in production anywhere?
Yeah, so production not quite yet, but soon to be. And the idea is to run it on the same backbone as the actual server.
How do you handle the multi-user situation?
Just works.
Yeah.
Well, so you're doing searches locally for this user, but you're only going to publish one Elastic server. So how do you get this user his answers?
Your search results is returned to the client, right? So your global var
It's a
contains,
REST call.
this is a REST call. So every client gets its own set of results that they get that. And Elastic can handle, really thousands of users concurrently. It's not a problem.
You're blowing away these tables, so this is important.
This is virtual lists.
Okay, yeah, so virtual list tables don't have any data in them.
It's all global, right?
Yeah.
It's using the global.
It's all using the global variable stuff. Right? So there's no, we're not, that's just an important thing. We're not loading it into FileMaker structure. We're just using the structure as a UI thing.
And what this is replacing is, I don't know, how long ago was it? 10 years maybe? Yeah. I wrote a plugin to do this. So I wrote a plugin that's using the SoundX function to try to get these fuzzy searches. And then it also has a Levenstein distance function to rank, how close this search is. And then it used, relationships on the graph and then I had to sort the portal by Levenstein and, that whole thing was just really, it was dog slow. It was, even though it was done as a plugin, it was the display because the plugin, even though it can return things in a ranked result, I couldn't do anything with that in FileMaker.
You have to rank it
at the display level.
Well, you have to rank it at the schema level.
Yeah, the schema level.
You have to calculate the score on the object that you're trying to rank. And this, you got to do all your global calculations and unstored calculations in there, and you can only do it on one table, and it's a mess. This is much better.
So this is much more flexible, much faster. I would show you the old way, but I'm really embarrassed by it. And this is, we can put this in anywhere. If you have multiple clients, you can deploy it on your own server and have them all hitting the Elasticsearch server, or you can deploy it on your client server if they have FileMaker on premises. You can say, here's your Elasticsearch. And then as they create records, adds the record to the database, and then the Elasticsearch is automatically updated that way.
It's called Elasticsearch.
I'm using Elasticsearch. Yeah, it's actually a companion tool. You can Google it. It's called Kibana and Elasticsearch. And Kibana is actually really important because with 17, we've lost some things on the server admin console, right? People complain about logs and stuff like that. But one of the nice things about the Elasticsearch suite that it comes with a Logstash product, which gives you a way. It's very similar to this. Basically, you are indexing your logs, and then you can do all kinds of stuff like through visualizers and stuff like that. So I may have it here actually. So this is Kibana, and this is actually the UI. This is not a FileMaker thing, but this is actually a UI that you can use to visualize your logs and your Elasticsearches and everything. So again, I'm not going to get too deep into that. If you want to Google it, it's Kibana. Kibana and Elasticsearch. Everybody use a FileMaker. All right. So I'm going to bring this to a close so that we can hang out and talk and do whatever. Cool? Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Are there any questions? Yeah.
How many servers?
One.
Just one.
Sometimes half. No.
Typically at one time, it depends. So for some things we use the web clients because like at a school, they're all taking attendance at the same time. They've got 250 teachers all hitting the attendance system. So obviously we can't put 250 clients on there unless we have like a really beefy server. So we find out that, making a web interface for that is usually the best way to deal with those sort of everybody's hitting at once task. And then for the administrators, usually there's only about 15, 20, sometimes up to 30 administrators who are in the system at one time. So one FileMaker server usually handles that pretty well. Yes.
So like for attendance or anything else, you're using entirely separate web application, or you're using FileMaker?
The data is actually in FileMaker. So when we're doing attendance, the data is in FileMaker. We've optimized it so that when they're taking attendance, we do local caching on the web part, and we've structured it so that when the client is sending things back to FileMaker, it's only doing it once, so that, we don't have clients, each teacher hitting FileMaker for every bit of data. We push everything to the website, and then when they take attendance, they send it all back in one packet, and then we parse it in FileMaker and create the records there. Just, PHP and things like that. We don't have hundreds of thousands. Hundreds or thousands, yeah. So yeah, we do have, with the students hitting it online, we do have thousands of students, and a lot of that is actually done just in the web. So we'll do something like a Python. We're actually using Python Django now to do a lot of our web work, and it's made it much easier with the data API and everything in FileMaker 16 and 17 to be able to have that integration, so that we could choose any tool that we want now because of that. Yes. Oh man, Ernest and I talk about doing a blog every other day, and does either of us actually do a blog?
It's a miracle we get it out here. No, I love it. I think that's, we've been in that little dev hole for feels like years now, and we've kind of neglected some public outreach stuff, and we'd like to get back, and maybe we'll start with Elastic as a topic. So, I love to share it with you all, because I think it's really cool. Remind me if I don't get it up in the next couple weeks or so. Yep.
Model give control
Yep.
I guess you guys call it interior. How are you passing data between that? Are you using the new 17 data API to do that, or is it like passing a JSON?
Okay. So we started this before FileMaker spoke JSON. And so we went through the whole parameters holy wars thing. I happen to have done positional a long time ago before people started doing standards. And so as a result, I just kept with positional, because the requirement to actually change from doing parameters in one style to another is just so heavy. But now what I do is I actually make my life harder, but I think for a good cause. All of my parameter passing is now done either positional or JSON. So I will take either, and I will inspect the parameter, say, oh, this is a JSON parameter, and then I'll use FileMaker's JSON parsing functions to get everything out. If it's not JSON, I'll assume that it's positional. And then I'm hoping to do this as sort of a transitional period to eventually using JSON for everything. And then the communication between the modules is, if it's FileMaker to FileMaker, it's just a FileMaker script calling another FileMaker script, sending parameters, getting results back. If it's FileMaker to the web, we've used a lot of different things. We used, the custom web publishing interface to parse, XML, or we've used PHP. We're looking at using the data API now. So we're using whatever technique makes the most sense and works the best for that job.
Do you think you can use the data API internally,
Yes.
You could, yeah. I don't know if there's a huge benefit to doing it that way.
very low latency?
Yeah, so CWP is actually pretty fast.
Yeah.
And notice I mentioned custom web publishing and not data API, because I'm still a little nervous. Although it works and we prototyped it, the whole bandwidth limit stuff and whatnot at our scale is like, okay, I don't know what will happen when we exceed that or whatever. Anyway, the plan is to move completely to data APIs, but today, without doing 17 stuff, the CWP functions are incredibly fast. And we've actually written a Python wrapper around that. You can go download different ones and experiment with different ones, but we have our own Python class where we basically expose layouts to, and it just takes it and translates that as basically a REST endpoint that then we hit with our web stuff, but there's no reason you couldn't hit it with FileMaker. Right? So the answer is yes. We haven't really found a lot of utility for what we do, but I can see where if you want to say inject, do a bulk operation that you don't want to iterate on a bunch of FileMaker records for, and you need a really fast web scale back-end thing to do. We could certainly do
Yeah.
that.
The one thing that I have wanted to do that to make things loosely coupled, because the looser things are coupled, the more flexibility I have. So that's been really attractive to me. Unfortunately, my clients are always screaming at me to get things done fast, and so I end up doing it the way I've always done it.
But to your point, though, I mean, the reason I'm demoing this Elastic thing is not just that Elastic has a nice API and I can hit it with FileMaker, but this could be a FileMaker service, and there's no reason why I couldn't query a FileMaker database over a REST service that talks to a FileMaker table or tables or file or whatnot, exactly the same way I'm doing this. Right? The abstraction is the same. There's really no difference. Obviously, I say that, but you've got to know this stuff, right? You've got to be able to write those scripts. I don't know what you guys are doing these days, but we've sort of settled on Python as our lingua franca, but we've done PHP, we've done all kinds of stuff, and I know Node is and JavaScript is like the thing du jour. But whatever it is, pick one. And I think if you haven't done so already, do add that to your repertoire, because it will really, you start getting outside of the FileMaker limits pretty quickly, and you can extend the FileMaker shelf life almost indefinitely. CWP is actually crazy fast for what it is, and REST API as well. Sorry. All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah. So we are actually using, thanks to FileMaker 16, we're able to. Before we were doing imports to Blackbaud's systems because we didn't have a plug-in free way of integrating with Blackbaud. When 16 came along, we were able to hit Blackbaud's REST APIs. And so now we've switched. I mean, we actually started out with an actual plugin that communicated between our system and Blackbaud's systems. Then we started doing imports. Now we're doing native FileMaker calling Blackbaud's REST APIs to actually integrate our system into their systems. That's
Blackbaud.
Interesting.
Are you in a secondary school or used to be? Are you using Razor's Edge, I guess, or were? Yeah.
Yeah.
Blackbaud. Yeah. We haven't done a donor profiling thing over REST, but that would be, yeah, that would be an obvious thing. But I tell you, on the mission side, it's everything is switching over to REST.
Right, and we just got a project assigned to us yesterday where we're going to look at different APIs to actually do donor profiling. So we have all of this data on the constituents. And we have their address. How much is their house worth? That's an interesting thing to know. Do we have public employer information about them? What charities have they given? A lot of that stuff is public data, or private data that you can subscribe to. And FileMaker has made that a lot easier now to actually get to that data.
But simple things like address validation, smartest streets. I mean, we're not shy to just steal, borrow, bag, whatever that's out there. I mean, that's, we think that's a good thing. I mean, the world is becoming very loosely coupled, and it's making FileMaker really great.
You had a question?
What sort of difficulties do you have implementing the party model? Because I saw that it was for like SQL stuff, and how did you get around not having natural joins and whatnot?
So the party model, the way that we've implemented, has gone through several iterations, and we've sort of learned like where we're pushing up against the edge of what is easy to do in FileMaker, and we've made some compromises. One of the things, like if you look at the relationship model, we're going from a party to a role to a relationship to a related relationship to a related role to a related party, and you'll notice that I counted 6 there, which is beyond the 5 that I told you about before. So now we've had to do like shortcuts. We looked up some keys here and there so we can shorten that path. So even though the model is fairly stable and kind of follows what Lynn Silverson said, we've done some FileMaker things to make it, if I want to search on, the related person, I don't want that search to take forever. So I can shorten that path up, so that it's only 3 or 4 hops instead of 6. So we've done things like that. We've refined the model. We've looking at addresses and phone numbers and things like that. We've gone through several different iterations of that until we've landed on the way that we think we can do it.
So two things. Go ahead.
I think the caching model that you're talking about, being 5 off, is kind of like a centering thing. So like, say you have 10 wide,
Yep.
and you come into the center at
It
2
is.
or 3 deep, you have 5 around you.
Yes.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
Yes.
And then you move to another layout.
That's right.
Yep. And then you have 5
and you
around
have
there.
5 around that.
Yes.
So you could be at this end of the join graph.
Right. Yeah, so it's not that our join graph is only ever 5 nodes deep. It's that the places that we, the context that we use, we try to make sure that everything that we're searching on or displaying is within 5 hops from there.
So the two very FileMaker-y things that we've done. I mean, when we first started out with the party model, we were like party model militants. Right? We're going to do this the pure way. Like none of this FileMaker crap. Right? It's like, oh crap, we have to put constants in there to speed up some joins. So okay, like grudgingly, we'll add K person. Like it pained me to do that, but we had to do that. Right? And it's it's gotten better. And when we first started, it was like no lookups anywhere because that's redundant data and it gets screwed up.
Right.
But now we have dependent key lookups, which are not great, but it works. If you're smart and you're conscious about it, you never have state problems.
Right.
But those are like FileMaker things to do to shorten the join or something.
Yeah.
Does that help? I don't know. It's painful.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
On the FileMaker community, I posted my notes from this session. And if you guys want to carry on questions and discussions there, you're on the community, right?